Actually, I'll start recording now. And I'll introduce you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a talk by Julian Gitsham from Hassell, London, about the architecture of the stars, Jodrell Bank Observatory in Britain. Julian is a principal at Hassell and the lead architect for Jodrell Bank and the square kilometre array headquarters, which are also there, and the First Light Pavilion, which is currently under construction at that site. So thank you for coming. This is being recorded. And Julian, I'll hand over to you now and mute my mic so that I'm not being a feedback person. Okay? Thank you very much, Julian, and welcome.
Thank you, Justin. Hi, everybody. Hope you can see me. I'm not sure if you can or not, but as Justin said, I'm Julian Gitsham. I lead the architecture and urban design team in London for Hassell. We are, you may or may not know, but a very quick bit of context for you. We're an Australian practice historically. We've been in London for 8 years now. We've grown to a nice size there of about 60 people. We're a multidisciplinary design practice, so we're not architecture only. We do everything from experience design through to master planning and urban design, and with architecture in between that. We have offices in across the world, as you can see here, San Francisco through to China, Shanghai, and Singapore, and Australia, of course. So well, I'm going to talk to you today about Jodrell Bank Observatory, which is the Centre for Astrophysics and Astronomy for Manchester University, which is one of the Russell Group universities in the UK, which is a bit like your, I can't remember what it's called, but it's like the top 8, but it's a research-based university of very high standing in the UK. And I've been working with the observatory for probably 15 years, maybe a bit more, a long time. And what I'm going to talk to you about is two things. I'm going to talk about the whole master plan context for the site and how we approached that, which we felt and saw as a really critical part of rethinking the Jodrell Bank location as part of their sort of desire for science, live science needs and tourism, and the relationship between those two things. And you'll see at the very end how that's become a really exciting component for them. And secondly, the buildings that we've built, but more importantly, what we planned and what we actually did, because there's a huge disconnect. And I think as students of architecture, it's really important to understand that it never works out quite how you anticipate, and things always go wrong and things always change. And part of our skill is always being adaptable and always being able to shift and change our thinking. And you'll see some significant changes, but I think it's a really important part of the story to tell you that. So I've got a lot of slides, so I'm going to be pretty quick, but I'm very, very happy to take questions at the end. And there's quite a lot of content, so bear with me. So look, first of all, science needs. So this is a radio astronomy centre. It's not an optical telescope. It's the world's largest radio telescope. And the square kilometre array, which I'll talk about, is the emerging world's large radio telescope, which is also a University of Manchester and international European joint venture. So basically, Manchester is a major city in the UK, which you may or may not know, of about 2 million people, and is very dense, basically. And when this was first created in 1967, the Lovell telescope, which is that big white thing on the screen in the image previous, was put out in the countryside at location number 2, as you can sort of see the difference in density there, because critically it needed to avoid electromagnetic interference. So in Manchester in those days was full of trams, still is actually, but historically there were trams there. and they created electromagnetic interference. And for radio astronomy, you can't have that. So radio silence is the most critical science need for this project, which means all mobile phones are off. Everything has to be radio silent. So it's a really, really interesting context in terms of the science needs. Also, it is the location of the Lovell telescope, which, as I said, is the world's largest radio telescope. But also, it has a number of other critical science projects running on. One is called eMerlin, and the other is the VLC, which is the VLBI, sorry, which is the very large. I can't remember what the BI is, but it's a very large telescope, basically. It's a big network. And then more recently, the Square Kilometre Array headquarters, which is basically an array of telescopes in South Africa, an array of telescopes in Australia, and the two work together. And the headquarters for 200 scientists is located at Jodrell Bank, which we've also recently completed. So it's quite an extraordinary project, and essentially it's going to give a greater power of radio telescopy looking at the universe of 10 to the power 6. So it's a hugely powerful new telescope. So Jodrell Bank has become even more important than it ever was. Independently of that, though, the science needs, there's a tourism context, and I think that this might be interesting for your project too, in that the Discovery Centre has always been an important part of this location. And when I was a kid, I used to actually live very close to this in a place called Knutsford in Cheshire, which is about 5 miles away from the telescope. So I've known this all my life. And we used to go as school kids, and we had, a number of funny little educational and exhibition experiences there. But over the years, it's really, really developed. It has about 400,000 visitors a year. And the development of that tourism and the telling the story of the science is a critical component of what we're trying to do here. So around it, you can see that there's a number of museums. The most significant museum of science and industry in Manchester. Chester Zoo actually is one of the biggest attractions in the UK. It has about 3 or 4 million visitors a year. And Alton Towers, which is the best theme park in the world, I think, also has a great number of visitors. So there's some really interesting tourism context that we were exploring when we were looking at the master plan. Also, which I'll talk about in a bit, the Jodrell Bank is also an arboretum, which I'll explain in a little minute. So it's a beautiful garden and landscape context as well. So we were also looking at the context of what was around it in terms of the gardens that it was competing with, because ultimately these are businesses and they need to make money. And so we also looked at the garden context around it. So we've got this fantastic combination here of nature and technology. I can't remember the exact scale of it, but I think it's something like 50 hectares in total. And Sir Bernard Lovell, who first created it, basically put the telescope here and also planted an arboretum and created this landscape scene. And it's fascinating. And over the years, it's become an extraordinary ecological and important site. It is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site as of July 2020. And the telescope itself is Grade 1 listed, which is the highest heritage protection that anything can have in the UK. So St Paul's Cathedral is Grade 1 listed, for example, in London. So it's a really, really important historical site for us to work with. So back into 2007, I think it was, we were asked by Manchester University to work with the Heritage Lottery Fund to develop a whole new experience for Jodrell Bank. So that essentially was the start of the master plan. And we worked for 2 years on that. And that was the time when there was big money around for big vision projects. So that's the context of this, because you'll see that it didn't quite work out like that. We started to think, therefore, about we wanted to increase the visitors to, say, 2 million people. So what were we going to need to do to achieve that? So first of all, we looked at the landscape character and we did an analysis of that. So So there was this sort of area of the Arboretum, there was the area around the Level Telescope itself, and then there was what was called the Village Green, which was the where the original Mark II telescope, which is the small one at the bottom right there, and you can sort of see the difference in scale. The Level Telescope is 76.8 meters diameter. The Mark II was one of the first telescopes which were just being tested on the site. And there's some amazing huts and historical areas around the Mark II Green. So we thought there were very, very distinct areas that we should be exploring in the master plan. We were then looking and exploring the views. Really important things to think about when we were looking at what would the journey and the user experience be across the site. So what we were looking at was short distance views, long views from the Cheshire Plains and from the Pennines, which are a group of hills to the north of the site, and you can see it in that bottom image there. Sort of, it's quite a dominant, quite a striking object in the landscape. And then the medium-term views and about how you approach it. So we were wanting to explore what would the journey be for a user coming to this location. And then of course we've got this amazing icon, this sort of beautiful structure, pure function, and essentially it's a steel dish. And they've done some really wonderful things, which I'll talk a little bit about in terms of what you use the dish. We've had dish walks on there, which is pretty amazing experience as well. So we've got this extraordinary object that we needed to be respectful of and to work with. So what we planned was this. We were wanting to create a vision which is essentially a citadel of science. So you've got live science, visitors are engaged and are excited and inspired by this place and astronomy. And all the science is related to that, and the fact that there is live science going on this site. But combining that with cultural, nature, ecological concepts and artistic experiences. So we had a vision, and that vision turned into these three ideas: Cosmos World, Discovery World, and Legacy World. And you can sort of see that we perhaps got a little bit carried away with this, but this was a sort of like £100 million project. So what's that, $230 million project or something like that. So there was a really big vision here, and we wanted each of those worlds to have a different feel, basically. So Cosmos was sort of a great sensory experience. Discovery was about live science, and then Legacy was about history. So we were trying to do three things, and what you can see here is how we essentially structured it up with the Discovery Centre, Cosmos, and Legacy, and the entry. And I'll just explain a little bit about that. So what we were looking at was this sequence of events where you entered, you basically had your mobile phone taken off you and locked away, so that the journey was from the very beginning reminding you of the science that was going on and the relationship between those things. So we created what we called a base station, which was the portal to this new world and to this science world, which was where you parked up, which is at the top of the screen here. I'm not sure whether you can see my cursor, but this was called the base station. Then you went on a ride, which I'll show you in a minute, through the site, and then started to go through the Discovery Centre and back through. So we were planning those views in the context of the ride and how you approach this and what you were looking for. So we were looking at views, we were looking at the ride route and how where that took you and what you experienced in the ride route. So you can see that we were circling Cosmos, slingshotting around the Level Telescope, and then going through Legacy and arriving at Discovery. We also designed a path network as well through the site, so that you were able to walk the whole site if you didn't want to do the ride. And then, really importantly, there was obviously the science needs as well as the tourism needs. So there were two demands there which we needed to assess, which was vehicular and servicing of the building. Really important because they're doing a lot of prototyping for things that are going to the moon and going into space. So they've got some quite big kit coming onto site, and there's some amazing bits of kit just left around the site. So the base station was basically that portal, and we wanted to create an idea that you sort of were immersed in nature as you approached the base station, and then you were sort of accelerated through it as you entered the site. You exiting the base station, you got the key view of the Lovell telescope. Basically, everybody comes to see the Lovell telescope. So we were thinking about the orientation, thinking about those views and that experience of exiting the base station and what you see next. And then the ride, we were exploring at that stage a shuttle system, and we were looking at where that went, as I said earlier, and the point drop-offs and things like that. And essentially, we wanted you to be able to go through the Discovery Centre at the end of that journey. So this was obviously a choice that you could go on or not go on. And we explored where that ride goes. Does it go above the ground? Is it concealed? Do you have a different experience if it's below the ground, or is it raised above the ground? And you can sort of see that we had a bit of fun with that, you know, when we were exploring that in all sorts of ways. We explored all sorts of vehicles for that for the ride, and as you can imagine, it got cut. Legacy was all about the story, which I've sort of touched on. Sir Bernard Lovell died only a couple of years ago at the age of 98, I think he was, and even up until that point, he was involved in the project, and he was the most extraordinary guy and an amazing individual. And it was his vision, basically, to create the Lovell telescope and this centre for astronomy here. And we wanted to recognise that through what we called, that's him actually planting a tree in his very early days. And there are these huts. They just put huts down on the ground. And what's amazing is that the reason that the telescope is where it is because they couldn't get the vehicles anywhere else. The ground was quite soft, and they actually hadn't planned it very well, so they basically got stuck. So they just unloaded the trucks and built the telescope in that location. So and then he planted this arboretum, and he was quite an amazing character. And the huts that are still there are things like the moon, something called the Moon Hut, which is where the first moon clock was created. And when it was first completed, Sir Bernard was really disappointed, because it was meant to be, of course, for exploration of space, and the government took it over and tracked Sputnik when the Russians in the Cold War were in orbit. And he was deeply disappointed that this extraordinary project of his was being used in a political and military sense. So it's got a marvelous history to it, and we love that about it. There's some bits of stuff left over on the site, as you can see here on the left, which we love. It's like a graveyard of prototypes and kit, and the legacy area of this was intended to tell all of that story. So in the legacy section, we created heritage trails. We were trying to build on that historical context. And you can see here some of the little huts that are left, which we were then protecting and developing. But we also created something in that area called the Colony, which was a whole new experience, which, for example, were overnight sleep pods, and which I'll talk about in a minute. So the Discovery Centre was about live science. I'm just going to quickly talk a bit about that. There's the Lovell telescope. The control centre for this is through an underground tunnel, which goes to a control centre which is connected to it. And what we were trying to communicate in the Discovery Centre was things like anti-gravity. There was a planetarium. There was this bit about aliens. This was trying to make this really interesting and entertaining and sort of educational. Also, we were explaining the electromagnetic spectrum and basically the science behind everything that goes on here. And we were essentially creating a half underground experience with connections and visual connections to the telescope. This is an aerial view of that Discovery Centre that we designed, which was conceived as a sort of a space station, really, with elements that plugged in and that were flexible as exhibition needs changed. The Cosmos, I'm sorry, I'm galloping through all of this, but there's obviously a lot more design thinking that went behind these things. But the Cosmos was all about light and space and experience and sensory experience. So we were inspired, for example, by one of James Turrell's projects, Roving Crater in the USA, and we were wanting to explore there a scale and awe and wonder. So we created a sphere which was the same diameter as the telescope, so a 76.8 meter sphere that you entered midway at the high level, and you essentially got views. We were bringing sunlight in, so the whole idea behind all of this was about the relationship between Earth and sky and time and space. And so you can sort of see the sort of the scale of this thing here. That's a person just in that bottom edge there. And we liked the idea of a great visual and sensory and an emotional experience of the cosmos. So this was going to be a constantly changing experience. And then we wanted then to explore across the whole site, which again is all part of the story, moments of we call them magic moments, you know, great bits of sort of surprise and delight as you explore the whole of the rest of the Arboretum. So this is what I was referring to earlier, the colony, where we just off the legacy area, where we were conceiving overnight sleep pods, relationship to ecology and nature. So tree houses, the glade pod that we called it there, areas where you could immerse yourself in the nature of this site, understand the ecology of it, and our relationship as man to nature as well as to space. So we kind of had a bit of fun with that as well, and I think it would have been really successful. So we were wanting to develop that whole ecology and biological context for the site, and we liked the idea of people staying over, you know, and having courses there and educational trips, being able to stay over in the site as well. So that was all of that habitat context that we were exploring there. So that was great. And then 2008 and the financial crash happened in the UK. You guys kind of escaped it a bit, didn't you? But we were hit really hard. And the Heritage Lottery Fund was essentially the big project in the UK, and it basically ran out of money completely. And the £100 million project became a £5 million project. It survived one thing out of that, all of that work and all of that vision. And the only project that survived was which I'm going to show you, was very different. So we basically stopped everything, but we had a bit of money to do a couple of things with. So we were then faced with a whole master plan vision, which was no longer so relevant. We tried to retain some aspects of it, but essentially what we did was we built a new entrance and pavilion building, which had a bit of an educational purpose. It had a cafe, and then we also built what we called the Star Pavilion that you can see here, and the Space Pavilion. And we tried to keep some of those ideas of the master plan, but as you can imagine, everything was different. First Light came much later, after, well, we started it in 2015, First Light. So you can sort of see that everything went. We had to completely adjust how we thought about everything, and our vision and our aspirations were different, and we were left with a very small amount of money and a very low budget. But that's kind of what we do, you know, and that's what architecture is all about. So we kind of responded to that. The car park stayed essentially around this area here for visitors. The car park down here for the science needs was located down on the south here, and we tried to design an entrance portal called the Planet Pavilion here, that you entered and exited through, and then went to the Star Pavilion and to the Space Pavilion. This became the location of the square kilometre array headquarters, which I'll show you, and this effectively became leased independently to the SKA organisation. So it's owned by Manchester University but leased to SKA. So there were some really interesting needs that were emerging in new ways from the original vision, and the SKA was a really important financial driver for the whole site. Down at the south side here, where we talked about legacy, that was the Mark II telescope there. We were retaining those important huts and spending a bit of money on them, rather than the great big vision of, and of course the ride went. We located First Light up here though, although I have to say when we were designing these buildings here, First Light actually wasn't on the drawing board at all, so I might come back to that. So as you can see, we actually created just some very simple buildings which were not expensive. They were actually really cheap, but we tried to make them as simple and as elegant as possible. They were just a black aluminium composite panel system. We tried to do something interesting, which is that is the radio wave signal of the universe on the facade there. You can see its relationship to the telescope, and it was all single-story buildings, because when the level telescope is vertical, there is a dimension that you have to keep below, which is essentially this sort of height, in order to not interfere with the science going on. That's the Planet Pavilion. This was the Star Pavilion, which was the educational outreach centre for the visitor centre. So this is where all the kids came and the school, and they have about 3 bus loads a day coming of school kids. So it's a really important site for that. As you can see, we took a similar language of material. We managed to spend a little bit of money on the story and the exhibition design, and we worked with exhibition designers on that. And that's another really important bit of designing these sorts of experiences, that is the relationship between an exhibition designer, or more commonly known as interpretation designers, and the architecture, and it's always a really interesting conversation, that. But as you can see, there was a little bit of fun here and a little bit of communication about the galaxy and stars and space. So that was those 3 little buildings, which were completed around 2010, I think, in the end. And then we were commissioned to design the square kilometre array headquarters. And again, this was a low building. This is a workplace building. And again, you can see in this image here, that's the Space Pavilion there, Star Pavilion, and the Planet Pavilion is just in that area there. This is the existing Grade 1 listed control centre, which is the same listing as the level telescope. And then we built this 2 phases actually for square kilometre array headquarters, which is a workplace building for scientists. So there's 220 scientists located in this building, managing and controlling the development of the SKA project. It has a big, we were trying to, again, very tight budget. We were interested in exploring the Doppler effect in this facade here, in terms of the facade. So we were always trying to do something quite interesting at some point with the project, which again, on very restricted projects, is something to be really aware of. And then we were trying to create a great workplace for the scientists. So this end here is a big chamber for the scientists to meet. So they come from all of the EU, or they did until COVID. And this is a major focus for this piece of new science across the world. So just look it up, it's amazing. They have a great website and a great Instagram as well, and it's just a wonderful piece of work that's going on, which is going to be groundbreaking and world changing in terms of the distance of years that they're going to be able to explore in the universe when it's complete. So that's a workplace building. Those other buildings were essentially exhibition buildings. Here you can see it's this bit on the right here is the chamber for the council chamber, it was called. So you can see it's not an expensive building, and the view from the top of the level telescope looking down on it there, bottom left, is quite spectacular though. So it's this relationship between the level telescope and everything around it is really important. So this is what we had before First Light. So we had planet, star, space pavilion. We then actually built a cafe extension here, which actually took a slightly different materiality. It became a gold veil, which was basically to do with the concept of nature. And here's the aerial view. And this location here was a piece of landscape design. It was called the Planet Gardens, and it was a not very successful bit of garden experience, which they had developed independently. And what we then did was First Light became a project. Basically, they had a vision to communicate even more the story and the history of the site, the Lovell Telescope, radio astronomy, and Sir Bernard Lovell, and basically got funding for a pretty decent sort of £15 million project. We had to go through 2 stages of tendering to win it, 2 stages of HLF funding. So by this point, the HLF funds had recovered a little, and we created a very simple brief. You may not be able to see this very easily, but this is a fairly simple building, but with a pretty decent ambition of a great big new main exhibition space, 730 square meters of exhibition space, a new 150 seat auditorium, which is basically a planetarium, educational outreach center, offices for the staff, cafe, and then the stuff that goes with that, the back of house. And I'm not quite sure where you are with your project at the moment, but you may well have developed your brief now. But and then and the whole idea was to create a sort of a mini version of that experience of entering here. So we actually created new entrance portals in the design to take it away from here, create a new entry sequence running through what to a key point in the landscape, which is called the Lovell hornbeam, which is one of the key trees that Sir Bernard Lovell was very proud of. And then you go through an existing beach hedge walk, which actually we wanted to take advantage of to hide the emerging First Light Pavilion. And it's called First Light because when you first switch on a telescope, whether it's radio or optical, that's what you see, first light. And so that's the first point you switch them on. So it's called First Light. So you walk through this hornbeam hedge, and then you emerge to see the First Light Pavilion. So we are still trying to create that element of surprise, the relationship to nature, the relationship to its history, and then something which you went wow at when you arrived. On the south, that's the north side. On the south side, we were spending a relatively small amount of money on upgrading the paths and the landscapes, those huts which I talked about earlier, and those sort of historical legacy elements of it. So that's had you can see sort of what the huts kind of look like. So we're spending a little bit of money on those, just tidying those up and making them sound for the future. So conceptually, this whole project we thought about, and again, at Hassell we talk about something called conceptual clarity, and I think that is really, really important. So you can have the macro piece of thinking, and then you need your micro bit of thinking. You've got your functional brief, but then for us, the two all have to work together. So it's a really important part of our design process is getting conceptual clarity. So for us, And we like to try and make that reasonably simple. It's about the meridian line. It's about time and the measurement of time and the relationship to astronomy over the years. So that was a sort of a key starting point. The meridian line it's obviously at Greenwich in London, and that is the, you know, as you may or may not know, that is the point of 0 for latitude and longitude, and everything is measured off that. So space and the universe is mapped from that line. So so we took that as a start, one of the key starting points. Then we also took historic references, and I think that this is another really important thing to be trying to consider in these sorts of pieces of work, is historically what's been done before, you know, and how might that be relevant to our thinking here. And often it's not directly related, but sometimes it is. So we were looking at, you know, as you can see here, 4,900 BC. You know, and what have people done in relation to sky and time? And because we felt that there was, I'll show you in a minute, there was 3 really important things about time, sky and nature, and observation. So Newgrange, for example, in Ireland, is an extraordinary tomb built of dome form, and it has one really important feature, which is a slot above the entrance, where the winter solstice sun passes through. It's a bit like Raiders of the Lost Ark, showing my age, eh? And where it strikes it and the sun penetrates it, and that's where what you mark time and life with, essentially. So there were some really nice references about this that we were looking at, as you can see, going through BC and some international references, Stonehenge, of course, through to India, and then some more current ideas. So we were looking at historic references for that. So then we kind of brought those 3 things together to form 3 ideas. One was the relationship with Earth and sky, one was measurement of time, and one was landformers observatory. So, you know, what were those 3 things? We're running out of time, aren't we? But basically, as you can see, we actually designed it down here with a massive reflective glass wall to reflect the sky. Essentially, that you exited the route and that formed and got to the entrance, and what you saw was sky. So this is essentially grounding you and asking you to explore that relationship. Then we designed within this the meridian line. So essentially we turned the building into a sundial, so it became a scientific object, so that we were wanting to mark time as you experience the building. And then thirdly, using the landformers and observatory is obvious. You know, we created a dome, which we wanted to connect back to history in that way, but also to use it for dark sky optical observatory. So they do use it for optical astronomy also as a visitor experience. So there were those 3 things that we were looking at. So this is what we designed. This is an aerial view of it, and as you can see, even then it changed. So the glass wall was value engineered out, which is basically cost cutting, and as you become professionals, you'll know that term intimately. And but we changed that to a concrete wall, which actually we love. We think it's a very beautiful sculptural part of the building, and we created a slot in that to for the measurement of the sun and time. So we still achieved what we were wanting to do, but we changed the concept slightly. So even, you know, right down to, you know, about to build these things change. And then we created 2 other slots in it, which were 2 important celestial points in the sky in terms of its latitude, longitude, which was the cafe, and then all of the back of house facilities. So this is a 76-meter dome, basically. So you enter, you come out of that route to it, which is still consistent, and then you enter this building through this point here between those two walls. The rest is grass and planting, and it sort of sits in the landscape like this as an object. And then you can see this is still an old image. This was when it was glass, and now this is concrete, and you'll see in the construction photos. but you can see what we were trying to achieve here in that. It's a 76.8 meter diameter dome, so it's the same diameter as the Lovell telescope. It's the first all concrete free spanning structures to be built, the largest to be built in the UK since 1952. So it's and Leeds University actually ran an independent piece of research on the structure of the building. So it's a really, really interesting structural story as well. But essentially, we created a round plan. The exhibition, as you can see here, is in this component here. The auditorium is here. Around the edges are the facilities, so the cafe, the kitchen, the WCs, and the engine space. So it's actually a very simple plan, not much to it, really. And then in terms of section, it's a really interesting section, as in terms of scale. And you can see how we were planning it to be used as landform. This is an image of the planetarium. So this is a fantastic space, which is came from the screen came from Texas. There's not many people that make screens like this. It's going to be one of the best in the world. And we also, importantly, with the exhibition, we took panels that were rusting off the Lovell telescope and needed to be replaced, and we've used them as the backbone of the exhibition design. So these are actual panels off the telescope, which you can see we identified. They were removed off the Lovell telescope, and they're being placed in this building as part of the story. So they're going to form quite an interesting, so these things that you're seeing here are actually the panels of the Lovell telescope, and then all of that interpretation and exhibition design is laid over it, as you can see here. So this hasn't started yet. We've just about nearly handed the building over. So finally, there's some construction photos here. This is it nearly finished. You can see that the grass hasn't grown yet. This was about a month ago. This is the slot for the sun and the measurement of time. And this is the other view. This is the entry view, in fact. So it kind of looks like the image, which is kind of nice. This is the cafe area here. And again, I won't go on about value engineering, but this was value. The railings here were meant to be Corten, and they're black powder coated aluminium, and it's kind of life. Unless you're I don't know, Herzog de Moren or somebody like that, then real life isn't quite how you envisage it. This is the screen, the planetarium, that you can't quite grab the scale of it, but actually it's pretty big. It's a very, very beautiful thing as well. This is the entrance here, which has turned out pretty well with the concrete, fair face concrete, and it's actually very nice cast concrete, and kind of looks like the image also. And then this is the main exhibition space, which is just a black box. And when it's fully fitted out, which starts next month, you essentially won't know about the black box anymore. So it's kind of a shame that all of this extraordinary concrete has been hidden. This is all black acoustic sprayed on material, but it's underneath there. So finally, so that's nearly complete. It will be completely fitted out by the end of the year in terms of the exhibition design, and hopefully will be launched early 2022. So finally, final slide. This is what I was saying, though, about that combination of science and arts and culture. And this is what they do so brilliantly here. So over the last 5 years, what Jodrell Bank have done is create an identity of culture and arts and science, and how those three things have to come together. And more and more and more, this sense of interdisciplinarity between these sort of themes is important. So what I love about this is the Blue Dot Festival is one of those things. So Blue Dot is of course the Earth from space, and they've created a festival which is now top 10 in the UK. It has about 50,000 festival goers, and they have amazing stuff like bands like craft work and Bjork and old people that you may not have heard of. New Order, I think, played there. But what they do is they bring music and science and live science together. So, for example, they bounce poetry off the Lovell telescope to the moon and back, you know, and then it gets bounced back, and that time delay is all about science, of course. And they're doing amazing things there. And the First Light Pavilion will become a really core part of Blue Dot in terms of visitor experience and communication of science and history. And for me, I think this ultimately tells the best story of bringing together art and science, and why it's so critical to get this right when you're designing places and spaces like this. So that's it. That's all I want to say. I will stop sharing, I think, so that I can see everybody.
Yay! Thank you very much, Julian.
Pleasure.
That was brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. And yeah, I when I was in practice, I remember the sort of concept. Just the words value engineering were the most horrendous kind of misnomer I ever really came across. It's something that outraged me every time I heard it, and I kept trying to just, you know, use some quite simple terms, which was like, "You bastard cost cutters." But it's as Julian says, that is something in architectural practice which you will all probably come across at one point or another, and you will find it logically infuriating, the term value engineering, because you know that the value is not being engineered, it's being dropped. But that's life, and it's something we all have to live with in this wonderfully sort of spreadsheet-based world. But I'm just going to ask a first question about this, Julian, which is not about that change that went across the from the 2008 crash to the First Light. But really, I mean, I think I was going to ask you about the concept of conceptual clarity, because that for me is really important in terms of actually being able to to isolate down from a multitude of themes to the themes that really matter. Could you expand a little bit on that, do you think, for me, of how you edit the possibilities down to the ones that are going to operate?
Yeah, sure. So our design process is quite rigorous and rigid in many ways, which I didn't show on the screen, but it goes through three parts of research, and then testing and realization. And those three components are fairly linear in many ways, and the idea of testing in the middle, doing lots and lots and lots of tests where we're completely open to possibilities is critical. But running through that thread of three components is the importance of having a strong conceptual idea. You know, we call it conceptual clarity, but it's basically saying, you know, there's four components here, you know, function, beauty, aspiration, and vision. But the conceptual idea needs to run through all of those. And sometimes it may be different. It is different for different buildings, different projects, of course. And sometimes it's very, very straightforward to find. And actually, we find it challenging to look and find it in some projects, but that's what we were trying to do in terms of improving our design capability, was realizing that having the conceptual clarity is critical. And but you are able to thin out the options and those sort of the multitude of ideas in that process. So it's kind of like an evidence-based process, which usually falls out fairly naturally, we find. But it is interesting, and we are in fact just yesterday talking about it for a set of 5 new projects. We are challenging ourselves, you know, describe the conceptual clarity for this project, and what we ask ourselves is to do it in one sentence. You know, what is the one sentence that describes the concept for this building, and it's surprisingly hard actually, often, but yes, and then it.
Sorry, you were getting feedback then, weren't you?
Yeah, I was. It's all right. I kind of finished.
Sorry, Julian. I'm flicking in between the microphones in and out. Are there any questions from the floor for Julian, guys? I'm getting a lot of dark looks. Isaac, do you want to come up here?
It's a really silly question. What's that bottle thing in the back? There's a bottle behind you that's really weird looking. I've just been looking at
It's Isaac, who's one of the tutors here, was actually fascinated by the bottle up to your left on the shelf at the end.
What is that?
It's just
wow.
a ceramic artist that is a very good friend of ours, and she does these beautiful bits of work like that. They're ladies basically. There's 3 of them. There's another one there. Yeah.
Julian, thank you very much. That was a very, very surreal question.
That's a great question.
Thank you, Isaac, very much. Julian, anybody got any questions on practical things in terms of brief here that you might want to ask anyone? I'm getting a look of, it's the end of the day here and we want to go home now. It was a wonderful lecture. Thank you very much. I'm reading between their lines.
Perfect.
Julian, I'm going to say thank you very much indeed for that, Julian. It's really kind of you. What time is it there now? Is it about 10 to 10? 10 to 9?
Yeah.
10 to 10.
10 to 10. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed for coming to speak to us, and it's been a real pleasure, and hopefully I can get you back in to some other conversations across the airwaves here, and I'm looking forward very much to seeing what First Light looks like when it's finished, and hopefully when we can fly again one day in the far future, in the science fiction future it feels like at the moment, we can come over and have a look at it. But thank you very much, Julian, very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you. Nice to see you, Justin. Bye, everybody.
Can everyone say thank you to Julian, please?
Bye.
Julian, I'll catch up with you in the next day or two, but thank you very much indeed for starting that so early. Have a good one.
Bye. 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 Bye.
Cheers.
Don't know how to exit. Bye.